we will be talking about market research for small businesses. And really, market research is required at any time that you are going to be launching a new product or service, launching your business, or even sometimes just to have a litmus test and understand what the environment's like out there. So for market research, I think a lot of times we think that we need to know statistics like the population of a country or a region, or how many babies were born, or what's the annual income. That can all be important, but really the key of market research is to figure out whether or not you can get people to spend money. So let's jump into this. The topics. Why is market research so vital? We'll talk a little bit more about that. Where to start? How do you know which market to penetrate? And how can I test this inexpensively? So to start off, why market research? Really is trying to figure out if someone will pay you for your product, service, or idea. The key concept here is that typically someone who has $20 in their hand is more emotionally attached to that $20 bill than someone who's offering them $20. So the money that we currently have, we're naturally more psychologically attached to $20 that we have in our hand. So that means for marketers, our job is how to persuade, convince, make sure that our product or service is worthwhile enough that they're willing to pay us. So market research, the end result should always be, will I make money on this? Is there really a need? Is someone willing to pay? So the statistic, 95% of newly introduced products fail. So that's not just for entrepreneurs, that's actually for large organizations as well. So 95%. Even just simply thinking about the grocery store, how often are there new products, new ideas? Even thinking about monsters like new Coke. So over a decade ago, Coca-Cola Classic, which is known for being traditional and classic, introduced new Coke. There was outrage. They obviously didn't do enough market research. And in fact, their sales plummeted because they introduced a new product that just didn't make sense. Another one was Vanilla Coke. They launched Vanilla Coke as well, and that also plummeted. If we look at McCain Foods, McCain launched the smiley faces. That did work, but they also launched at the same time an onion flavor of it as well as a cheese flavor of it. Those ones didn't fly. They only now sell one variety of that product. But when they first launched it, they tried multiple ones to actually figure out what would work. So next, what is market research? There's two major types of market research. First, there's primary research and secondary. The key difference. Secondary research basically is existing research, information that's already out there. So the key advantage being, of course, that it's cheap. It's probably already out there somewhere. You can find it. You can go to the local library or small business center, go through magazines, newspapers. You can find the information. The downside is that it might not necessarily answer a specific question that you have. Because to be realistic, if you're trying to figure out if someone's going to pay you money for your product or service, that's very specific information. And sometimes that's not readily available. That's when you have to fall back to primary research, which can be more expensive and more time consuming because it involves focus groups, interviews, surveys, online surveys, social media, forums, emails. So there's lots of different options out there. The only one that's really tricky is probably a focus group. Focus group is when you have usually a maximum of 8 people in a room. You have a facilitator, usually an expert who's great at mediation with groups, who ask questions that are usually open-ended. So what do you like about this product? And the group discusses. And you take notes, you usually record it, and see what kind of findings comes out of that. Interviews can be one-on-one or 1 to 2 or 3 people at a time. And surveys, usually instead of it being an open-ended question, which allows any answer, usually with surveys you try and reduce open-ended questions because that allows you to analyze data later. So you move to closed-ended questions. And a closed-ended question would be very direct, where you only expect 1 or 2 or sometimes a specific answer out of 5 potential responses. You can still allow them to be open-ended by having an other category, which allows people to fill that in. But the negative or downside of that is that if you allow someone to do other or an open-ended question, especially if you're getting 100 or 500 respondents, it's really tough to analyze the data afterwards and make it useful for your business. So next, where do you actually start? So now that we know some basics about market research, why do we do it, the stat out there, as well as the 2 types of market research, where do you start? Well, really, you should always start with market research that's going to alleviate or remove your biggest risk that you have. And the biggest risk typically is sales projections. Are your sales projections on target? So if you're in an established industry or business, so that would be like a hair salon, accountant, lawyer, things that are generally understood already, what you need to do is you actually have to select a target market and research within that area to see whether or not your sales projections are going to be accurate. So to choose your target market, some things that you should consider is your own personal side. So what are your strengths? What's your passion? And is that aligned to the target market that you're looking at? Next, is there a lot of competition going after that target market? That makes it more difficult, so maybe that reduces the chance that you want to choose that one versus another. Market reach. That basically means, where do you already have contacts? You know a lot of people within a specific industry. For instance, you don't want to penetrate the hotel marketplace if you don't have any contacts within the hotel industry. Margins. So is there one target market that has a higher willingness to pay than others? Maybe takes less support, less onboarding, things like this. Your margins are reduced the more time you have to spend with someone. And size of the marketplace. Simply, is it big enough to satisfy the revenue targets or sales targets that you're looking for? A lot of this information is very possible to get secondary research. For instance, there's 2 ways to do your sales projection. You have the top-down approach and you have the bottom-up. The top-down approach means that you basically go and look for the total size of the target market that you're looking for. Then you understand what market share is already held by others. For example, within carbonated beverages, there's Coke and there's Pepsi. Pretty much in the international market space, Coke and Pepsi in each country takes up 90% of the market share. That allows you about only 10% of the market share is remaining, because the 90%, most of those consumers are extremely loyal. In fact, for no-name products, that's only typically 10 to 15% of the market share, especially in something like carbonated beverages. So then you realize how much is actually available. Now you have to forecast how much you think you'd be able to capture of that remaining market share. And then this pops out your sales projections. Now, that's just the top-down approach. It's important to also do the bottom-up. The bottom-up, you start with the number of possible sales that you have. What's your capacity? How many sales could you actually physically deliver? Then, taking that, what's your average sales number? If it's higher than your capacity, you obviously can't do it. So then your capacity is your average sales number. Then you turn your average sales number per day into your projected sales revenue. What you're able to do now is you've figured out what your top down is and your bottom up. It's where they overlap is the most likely place where your sales projections are actually going to land. Here are some secondary research options that you have in order to find this information. There are small business centers again, business libraries, statistic bureaus, trade magazines, and newspapers. What I personally do and where I always start is any business reference library. They usually have unlimited resources. And the nice thing is that the librarians are trained specifically on how to find information within all of their research catalogs and magazines that they have. So just go to the librarian, ask them the specific information you're looking for, and they're going to start helping you. Next, so if you're in an existing industry or business, It's not easy, but it can be cheaper to research because you don't have to worry about whether or not there's going to be adoption or whether or not there's even a need. You don't have to prove the concept. The concept's been proven. You have to prove through your market research that you're going to earn market share. With new industries, new product or service ideas, so more for an inventor, this is where it becomes a little bit more complex because your big risk is that people won't buy anything. Forget that you won't get the market share. So the first thing that you have to prove in your market research is understanding if there's even a need. The way to do this specifically is going to start with interviews. Ask 20, 30, 40, 50 people on one-on-one interviews what they think about the idea in general. Now, as an inventor, as soon as you start doing this, if you do not get them to sign NDAs, and if you plan on patenting this, within 12 months of the first time that you talk about an idea, you have to file for a patent. You don't have to have a patent, but you have to file for one if you're going to do it at all. And the whole idea is if you don't get them to sign an NDA, that just means that you've made it public information. And so you have to file a patent within 12 months of making your idea public information. So that's a big red flag for you. The next thing is once you understand that there is in fact a need and people think that, you know what, that is a problem. Yes, your product or service will satisfy that problem. The next thing is really understanding adoption levels. So there are 5 major types of adopters. There's basically innovators. Those are people who really love the ideas first. Then it goes to early adopters. That's about 13.5% of the population. They're people who still like to be leading edge, cutting edge. Early majority, they might not necessarily look at themselves as completely innovative, and yet they are one of the first people to actually go to the store to start buying. Then we have the late majority, people who basically when the trend is tried, tested, and true, they start buying, and laggards, definitely traditionalists. Just to walk through this really quickly, one at a time. Innovators, typically well-educated, affluent, eager for newness. The best example, dentists. Dentists are extremely well-educated, they're affluent, and interestingly enough, they really, really love all these gadgets. So they're the first people to buy the iPhone. Many of your dentists probably now have TVs or they have really neat technology and they're excited about this stuff. Dentists are great innovators. So if just to even understand that type of marketplace, that's a good example. Next. Early adopters. They're usually opinion leaders. They're tied to the community and tied to norm groups or group norms. So what that means is they care what other people think about them, and yet they're still leaders within their pack. A great example of how Nike uses this is Nike actually gives away their new shoes to the top runners in each region every single year. And so the whole idea is they're basically leaders. They're trendsetters when it comes to athletic wear because other students who see them wearing these new shoes think, oh, maybe if I get those shoes, I can run like them. Or they think, oh, they're great athletes, so I respect their opinion, so I would also want the same type of shoe that they have. And so that's how Nike actually leverages this concept of adoption types. Then there's the early majority. They research a little bit more, and they definitely talk to their colleagues prior to buying. So they'd actually reach out to the early adopters, understand why they like the product or service, and then they'd buy it. Late majority buy due to peer pressure, often older, less income, or less educated. But the late majority, I mean, you can even see that among your own colleagues, and it might even be yourself, is, you know what, really, when you first see a fad, you think it's going to go away, people keep on buying it, you know what, then you jump on board. Internationally, Canadians are actually perceived as late majority in general. Because for technology, we're one of the last countries who usually gets it. I mean, Scandinavia is definitely the innovators and the early adopters, as well as, of course, United States Americans. They'd probably be the early majority, whereas we're the late majority. We're a lot more risk adverse. And finally, laggards. Independent, traditional, and resistant to change. So, of course, they would be the last one to buy a new piece of technology. In fact, once the next type of technology is out, that's probably when laggards buy the last one. So will people even adopt your new product or service? Here's the key factors for adoption rates. Basically, number one, there's no reason to change. If there's no reason to change, or at least it's not visible that the new product or service or idea is that much better than how they're currently doing things, people will simply not change. High complexity. Is it too tough? Perceived risk. Are they putting themselves at risk here? Negative impact on personal image. Will they look bad? And can they test it before actually outlaying money? So a good example here would be the Internet. The Internet was actually invented back in 1940s for World War II, actually, for communication and helping on that side within the Army. So why was it never rolled out to the general population? And maybe for security reasons, but really the world wasn't ready for it. There was no reason to change. Everyone had typewriters. Why do I need something that's electrical? Why would I need even a computer? I mean, that wasn't even there right now. High complexity. Obviously, it would be more confusing back in the 1950s and 60s to explain how Internet worked, whereas now with all the technology that we have everywhere in our lives, it makes a lot more sense. Perceived risk. Obviously, it would be scary to take that first leap. There wouldn't have been any trialability because you would have had to actually buy all your huge mega computer probably, and it would take up an entire room of your house, if not two. Then how would you figure out the network? It would be very expensive. You couldn't actually try it. And then of course the negative impact. If you actually had a computer in 2 rooms of your house, all your neighbors would think that you're nuts. So that would be an example of why it didn't work then. But in 2000, now, reason to change? Okay, Internet. I already have a computer. I've been using my word presser. And you know what? It'd be really great if I don't have to go to the post office. Now I could just email them. Or research is a lot easier. I don't have to go to the library anymore. It was seen as more convenient. It was no longer complex, less risk. It would actually, if you had Internet, people thought that you were cool rather than it being negative. And trialability. I remember actually in the mid-1990s, whenever you went to the mall, they actually had Internet cafes set up in the middle of the malls for people to try the Internet. So how do you actually create your own primary research to alleviate this risk? First off, like I said, start with open-ended questions. So talk to 10, 20, 50 people and find out in general if there's a need and their ability or willingness to adopt and pay for this. And then once you have the basic information of what people are actually looking for, that's when you turn them into close-ended questions and create a survey. What you want to do is get over 100 responses. Typically anywhere from 100 to 500 is great. If you only get 50, that's okay, but you're going to expose yourself to more risk. Getting up to the 100 or more definitely is going to help validate the fact that your survey results are accurate. There's lots of online survey options for you, so using surveymonkey.com, that's a great helpful tool for you. But even just going on social media forums. They have polling on LinkedIn. You can throw a poll or a questionnaire on your own website. You can do polling on Facebook. So there's lots of different options. Or the link from SurveyMonkey, you could tweet it and get people to respond that way. Although market research is great and people saying they're going to buy it's wonderful, really nothing beats proving it and actually selling it. So in business to business, if you're actually asking and giving surveys and interviews to potential business customers, warming up their interest and awareness levels, if you can, before you even start producing, try and get distribution contracts, letters of intent, maybe even an early purchase order. Why not? I know you don't have the product or service developed, but getting them to sign something definitely shows a willingness to pay. And if you're going to consumers, another way is actually to put your product or service on eBay or Craigslist and Kijiji. Maybe you don't even have it done, and again, it's a future order, but just to find out that people actually clicked on it and tried to buy it, maybe it's not even a real buy page. Maybe it just says, sorry, this product's unavailable, we will email you when it's ready, and collecting their emails for future, at least now you know that people clicked buy now. So they've actually done that action. And it's more than just saying, yeah, sure, I might buy that. They actually did the action to buy it. It's a big difference. So in summary, market research is vital to alleviate risk, specifically on sales projections. Where to start? Well, it depends. Are you in an existing business or industry or a new business or industry? How do you know which market to penetrate? Well, just think about your strengths, your passion, the competition levels, who you already know, what are the margins, and then really the willingness to buy. What are their adoption rates? Do they perceive there to be a need? And how can I test this inexpensively? Well, getting early contracts, letters of intent while you're doing your surveys is great, or simply test it through online avenues like Kijiji, Craigslist, and eBay. With that in mind, thank you very much. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us at info@smallbusinesssolver.com.